So previously we were working on the body structure. So we started with looking at the feet, the legs, pelvic floor, up through the abdomen, the core engagement, the wings, the head. So you had the images of like the horse, sitting on the horse, or the turtle in the back, or stretching like a greyhound. The cobra type move to open the back of the neck, moon on the head, pressing up through the top of the head, arms like wings, shoulders kind of floating and free, engaging the hands. Second one in the structure, we were looking at kind of integration. So this opening and closing, or pulling inwards, gathering inwards, which relates to the core engagement and pelvic floor and that kind of thing. Today we'll look more at the space, the kind of surrounding space, and also the feeling of space inside, and the idea of the directions. So sometimes it's described as 6 directions: left, right, forward, back, up, down. 8 directions: left, right, forward, back, up, down, inside and outside. And so that the inside and outside includes the external space and the internal space. So a simple way to start with that is if we're standing just in a basic standing posture, you can just start to move in those directions. So you can move left and right, and slightly forward and back. So that would be just rocking back and forward slightly. And obviously you can move up and down. The combination of them would be just kind of opening out and relaxing in, or pulling in. So that's like all directions open and then back inwards. Another way you can do it is you do a slight counter move. So this is left and right movement. And the hands, it's almost like the hands could stay where they are, as if I'm holding onto a tree, or you push slightly the opposite way. And I'm trying to feel the whole body move, not just the shoulders, so the whole body shifts. So left and right. Then back and forward with a slight counter movement. So as I move back, the hands move out, then in. Up and down with counter movement would be sit down as the hands float up, hands go down, body comes up. So you can just play around with those. So the left and the right, forward and back, up and down. And this is the kind of thing you see in each one. So when in each one, you'll see that type of movement. You can also, if you get comfortable with that, you can go sort of diagonally. So that would be sort of diagonal version, or the other side. It could be kind of circular as well, but that's a bit more complicated. But just a sort of natural feeling of moving around in space, as well as the vertical. And however you visualize the basic 6 directions, I mean, one way, simple ways, think of it as like a cube. So you've got the 6 sides of the cube, or you could think of it like a ball. But the cube at least makes me go like, that's left, that's right, this is front, this is back, this is the top and the bottom. So just getting familiar with that. The thing that's maybe missing from that, as in terms of the space surrounding me, is this part. So we've already kind of covered that. So while I'm touching the space to the sides, to the front and the back. Also aware of the space in between the legs. And we're kind of holding the space with the arms. So now I'm feeling all of the space and engaging in 6 directions. You've got the idea of heaven, man, earth. So heaven being the space above you, or it could be the space around you, but especially above you. The man or the human or the woman is in between, and then the earth is the space on the ground, or like a kind of axle of between 2 wheels, this kind of thing. So the heaven and earth, and then the surrounding space. So those are probably the 2 primary of the 6 directions, the first ones that we're trying to engage. So the crown of the head touching the ceiling, the feet touching the ground. The base of the pelvis as well, so that's like the the seat of the horse, or the saddle, if you like. It's the same as the ground, so it's underneath. From Chen Manqing, there was these, what he called 8 methods. So that the first of the 2 8 methods cover heaven and earth. So in the ground, you have this feeling of walking on thin ice. So the image is trying not to break the ice, feeling the step lightly on the ground. With the ice, the image, it could be that my mind spreads wider on the floor. So I'm aware of the ice crackling around. So not just the feet, but the whole surface. And the lightness of the touch, aware of the contact you're making on the ground. In the Tai Chi classics, they also say walk like a cat. So the cat is walking and feeling the ground. They also have the idea of the crotch arch. So that seat of the pelvic floor is also part of the earth, in a sense, the sitting on the horse. So you're aware of the touch of the feet, also maybe the feeling of the arch of the legs. Then at the other end, Chen Manqing's image of 8 methods was like you're wearing the moon on your head. So he also said the pillar of heaven is between heaven and earth. And the phrase was, if the pillar of heaven collapses, then there's no hope left. So the importance of the pillar of heaven. And that's the connection between heaven and earth, like the pen or the axle. So the wearing the moon on your head, there's a feeling of pressure or weight coming down that the pillar has to support. So the moon is not just a point of reference, it's the whole feeling of a pillar supporting the ceiling, connected to the ground, but still light on the ground. So between heaven and earth, you're connected, or sort of plugged in at both ends. So the earth under the feet, also the earth under the pelvis and the crown of the head. And if we're thinking of that more widely, like the ice, like a whole kind of puddle of ice, the same with the crown of the head, the moon, you could think of like one image one of my teachers uses is like a merry-go-round, like a carousel. So you've got maybe a disc at the top of the fairground ride. In the center, you've got an axle, and then the floor is a big circle. So you're aware of the whole of the ceiling and the whole of the floor between heaven and earth. Not just one point and not just the feet. So you're aware of the space between the feet and surrounding. So this idea of 6 directions in harmony is similar to the concept of Tai Chi, so yin and yang. Whatever you name yin and yang doesn't really matter. So you could say that the yin is the floor, the yang is the heaven. So Tai Chi is the interaction of the 2. So there's a kind of relationship and a live connection, like a circuit that connects between them. They're not just separate, so they're interacting. And that's depicted in the Tai Chi symbol, obviously. So in our own practice, the walking on thin ice and the wearing them in on your head, when you do them both, there's something else happens, which doesn't have a name in the 8 methods, but you can feel it when you do 2 things. There's a third thing or a bigger thing that happens. And that's beginning to engage in the idea of Tai Chi. Another concept in Tai Chi, we have central equilibrium. Some people interpret that as a center line, but it's more than that. It's the harmony of all elements. So the 6 directions, but it could be more than that as well. It's not just directions. It's anything you can create a sort of differential within the mind and body is part of central equilibrium, part of Tai Chi. So we're starting with directions today. So that's the vertical direction that we've looked at there. Part of that we've covered already, which is kind of like the internal structure and the physical structure up and down. So that's related to heaven and earth. So the springiness in the feet, the lightness in the feet, the engagement of the pelvic floor and the core, the floating of the wings and the crown of the head, all of that is between heaven and earth. So from the previous classes, we can relate to this direct up and down direction. But what we're doing here is going beyond the body. So again, in the Tai Chi, you have this idea of a Tai Chi ruler. So it's just like a rolling pin. And again, it's like an axle between 2 wheels. When I have the connection from heaven and earth, it's like I've contained and supported the axle, like you've connected the bolts or the nuts, rather than it's just flapping around. So taking the example of this bottle, it's connected to the ground, but the top part's not connected to anything particularly, so I can move it around easily. If someone was to lean on it and then you try and move it, it's going to be hard to move. So that's like the pillar of heaven is supporting the heaven, and it creates a strength, a strong connection between heaven and earth that makes it hard to move. So you can feel that in your own body when you feel connected from the heaven back down to the earth. There's a containment, like the Tai Chi ruler. It's like you've connected the bolts of the axle, and suddenly you're more stable, more centered, and in push hands or partner work, you might feel that you've got more strength in your structure, but it's coming from outside, it's not inside. So from this moon on the head, the connection to the ground is stronger, and the connection up from the ground is stronger. So you could call that sort of containment. It's opening and closing vertically. Another image you might use for that is like a bowstring. So if this was a bow, if the one end's connected but the other end's not, it's loose or it's completely useless. If it's a bow and I'm tying it here, now there's a strength in it and there's a elastic kind of horizontal force. So if this is heaven and this is earth and they're connected, now you've got a power in the bow. So that's another way you can imagine it. So when I hook to heaven and connect to the ground, I've got something like a bow or an elastic power potentially in the body. So this has taken us beyond just physical strength and a sort of solid structure. It's a connected relationship between heaven and earth. Okay, so that was talking about the outer space, if you like, the external space. So this horse space, the floor is not space, but it's an outer connection, and the space of the heaven touching the head. Between heaven and earth, we've mentioned already, you've got the physical structure or the stretchy internal structure, but I could also try and imagine the space between heaven and earth. So between the heaven and the earth, I could imagine there's just an empty space inside. And from the containment at both ends, I can start to feel the space. So in practice, we can imagine opening the space inside the body and in a vertical way. We can also do it sort of horizontally, but we'll do the vertical. So one of my teachers, Brett, has the image of imagining hose pipes connected under the feet, and you start to open the legs as if they're filling with water. Then you feel the space of the torso filling and opening. Then, as if inside the body is only space, and it's opening. So the arm space, the hands and the fingers, through the neck. You can imagine the space around the head is opening. And then we're connecting to heaven and earth outside. So we're thinking of that up and down, but it can also be expanding outwards. So as it fills up, it fills out as well. So you can do that in a sort of general way, or you can do it in a slow way. Some people say like granular. So like taking your time as you do it. So with the feet, one of Brett's ideas is to feel the top of the feet. So you feel the foot is opening this way. So if I imagine the top of the foot rising like a loaf of bread rising, you feel the foot open. Then into the ankle, you can feel like the hose pipe expanding in the ankle. I'm still maybe aware of this horse space and this space around me. We'll talk about the surrounding space in a minute. As I come up through the calves, feeling like the hose pipe opening, the knee opening, the thigh opening. And the opening can be like a release of tension as well, if you imagine that. So like, if you tense your fists and then just release the tension with still maintaining the fist shape, but you feel the space open inside. You can imagine something like that happening inside the legs, rising up. Then there's the space around the pelvis. So the hose pipe or the water is opening. Into the lower torso, you might feel especially around the lower back, the Ming Men area open. We don't want to push the belly out, so they still have a stretch up through the core, but there's an openness. So the lower dantian or the pelvis is kind of floating and opening there. To the waist. So in Yang Cheng Fu's 10 points, he emphasized releasing the waist. So you can feel it, especially around the ribs and the back. This relates to things like the turtle, but we're looking at the internal space opening. Then the upper torso or the kind of heart center, just feeling natural open behind you, in front of you, all around. The shoulder area opening. So this is where we look for sort of buoyancy, not heaviness. So you feel the shoulder space open. It might feel like the shoulders float slightly rather than hang. I can go down through the arms, so I can feel the arms like hose pipes, space opening, the upper arm, the elbow, forearm, wrist. The palm of the hand, each finger opens. The hand opening like that, like the foot. Then up to the top of the shoulders, into the neck, and just feel a feeling of openness, the back of the neck, the face relaxing, and the connection to the moon on the head or the crown of the head. So that's just a way to feel this internal space open. If you connect that to the breath, you could feel as the breath comes in, the breath fills all that space, or the energy or the chi or the breath. We can relate that to the feeling of the pores, so the sense of pore breathing. So that's the surface of the body, but then the inside. So we did that in a vertical rising fashion. But an important part of that is also this expanding horizontally. So you're opening in 6 directions, not just up and down. So going back to the outer external space, you've got the space in front, the space behind, space to the left, space to the right, and the heaven and earth, and the arch of the legs. So again, Chen Manqing's had his 8 methods. For the horizontal space, his images were for the lower body, like you're wading in water, or fording a stream is how he called it. So you have the feeling of walking through water, or you could feel like the current is pushing against your body, so you feel the space pushing you. And again, Chen Manqing had the image of Tai Chi being swimming on land, so you're moving through the air like water. And Wolf Lowenthal, when he was in Scotland years ago, said, using the term the air like iron. That's finding this solid support. Same way as I was pushing down on the bottle from above, you could feel the same containment from the surrounding horizontal space. If we just focus on the fording the stream exercise for a moment. So beyond the arch of the legs or the crotch arch in the horse, you can imagine a wider kind of sphere around here. You can imagine like an old Victorian dress or whatever they're called, a big dome or something, or just the sense of a river that you're standing in. Just feeling the space around you, even just looking at the floor and seeing this bigger sphere. So that connects to the outer legs and the inner legs. You could still be kind of starting to create the differentials and interactions, so you've got the up and down still accessible when you do that. So there's a few things that happen with this exercise. One is you could feel as if when you step or walk, you're moving through thick, heavy substance like water or something thicker. In Bagua and Ichuan, they talk about stepping through mud or dragging through mud. So that's one element of it. Another is you could feel as if you're being pushed by the current, and you feel, in terms of the 4 directions, forward, back, left, and right, you could feel like the water is pushing you in those directions. Could be also diagonal, so you feel the diagonal current. Still having the space between the legs. Still kind of capped at both ends as well. The water could come up through the legs or above the legs, so you feel the connection from the abdomen to the legs. So this junction through the pelvis is connected to the space around you. As you're doing that, you can also imagine the space opening on the inside. So all these elements can interact. You don't necessarily have to control them in isolation. You might naturally feel they combine. The other horizontal image from Chen Manching is setting a sail, as he calls it, which is like standing like a sail in the wind, or you imagine the boat being pushed by the water, by the wind across the water. So you just have the feeling of the wind, strong wind pushing against you. It's touching the whole surface of your body now. It could be in front of you and you feel you're pushing against it, or it's pushing you back, or the wind's behind you, it's pushing you forward and you're leaning against it. So you can walk on the ice, have the moon on the head as you feel the sail in the wind. And doing these little counter movements has a bit more meaning when you do that. You can feel it's the space around you is moving you around or connecting to you. So when Brett Hall was over recently, he was using the idea of a wall. So rather than the wind or a sail, it's more like the sideways space is like a solid wall. This is like Wolf's idea of the air like iron. So if, rather than a wind behind me or a sail, there's like a solid surface that's immediately touching me. It's more like the horse or the ground or the moon and the head. They're solid. So when I have the wall beside me, I'm completely contained by the wall or two walls. So like in a narrow door frame, it's immediately touching me. So that gives you a sense of being immovable and totally contained by the space, rather than it's water, it's concrete, or it's iron. So you're much more stable, maybe, with that feeling. So it's no different from the ground or the moon. So if you've got that stability in 6 directions, it's like when I was resting on the bottle, whatever direction you push on it, it's solid. It's kind of locked in position. That can seem like a kind of tense image, maybe. So from inside, we're still opening and releasing into that containment or touch of the solid space. So we've got the solid air surrounding you, the solid ground beneath you, but inside it's like an empty space as well. So it's, in a sense, it's all empty as well as solid. And that internal space of fullness or emptiness, one teacher described it like a car tire. It feels solid, but it's empty. And it's opening in all directions. So this is also the quality in Tai Chi of Peng. So Peng is like the balloon man. Again, this image. And it's not a bad image because it's solid, but it's inside it's fluid or empty. So Peng can feel like it's solid, but it's space from the perspective of the mind and the body. You're not trying to tense or solidify your sensation, it's more open. And you can actually compare that. So if I tense the arms and feel the solidity of the hard structure, then I open, or the fists, then I open and empty, and it's just like hose pipes, but it's like a fire hose that's immovable. So you got heaven and earth, you've got left and right, the walls, or the wind, or the water, space between the legs, which can be also 6 directional. So it's opening that way. It can be also lifting me up. I can be sitting on it like a spring. So it's not just this way, it's not just that way, it's every direction. And you've got the harmony of the external and the internal. So from inside we're opening, but where our mind is kind of expanding also potentially to the outer space, spreading on the ground, aware and connected to the space around you like water and the heaven above. So between the inside and the outside, the mind is expanding. You can imagine a big sphere around you, but the sphere is also the space inside. So when you're learning this, initially you practice in a fairly static position, but you could try it in different stances. So you've got the parallel stance. It should be the same in any stance. The stances have different features, so this stance maybe feels like it's forward and back, but you can equally be aware of up and down, left and right, or diagonal. You can still be aware of the inner space and the outer space, the moon on your head, the wind behind you or in front of you, or the solid walls. Even in a cat stance or on one leg, you can still have that feeling, although everything's seemingly in one leg, I'm still connecting to the space between the legs. And there's a distinction here between the weight distribution compared to the six directional mind expansion, or whatever you want to call it. So it can be difficult to not just be locked. The mind gets trapped in this leg because it's doing a lot of work. So then you have to open, let the mind expand out through the whole body. And this is like the Zhong Ding feeling. It's not just legs, whole body in six directions. Even if we're standing in one of the Yichuan postures, you see them standing like that. So if you're still balancing on one leg, I'm still feeling six directions and the space between the leg, and like standing in the wind. So obviously an image Brett had to try and get us out of the legs was to feel like the pelvis is floating on water, like a life buoy here, and like you don't have any legs. So there's a sense of floating rather than going into the feet. So we come out of the legs, float, or feel the space between the legs floating you up. So when the weight is moving, or when you're doing the Tai Chi form, rather than think of going from one leg to the other, the mind is in a bigger field. So it's challenging to practice this in the Tai Chi form, especially if you're used to doing it in the way that's taught, like weight distribution and rooting or grounding through the legs, sinking through the legs. This is much more coming up and out. But you see it in some of the famous teachers will talk about this as well. So Sam Tam is one of them that is known to be more light in his Tai Chi and Yichuan. Also, Paul Rogers, who I train with, says he's never been taught to ground or go into the ground. It's much more mobile, but he feels extremely solid and strong. So an element of this is also the feeling of where the movement might come from, the space. So in Chen Manching's image, it's the sail. So the wind is moving me rather than the body. So rather than the legs pushing, I could feel like the space is moving me, the wind is moving me. And that keeps my mind bigger than if I think push from that foot to the other foot. Or I'm floating like a boat, but there's something pushing the boat. It could be the current or it could be the wind. And at the same time, I maintain the whole six directions. So I maintain the moon on the head and the touch of the foot on the ground. So the wind can be making me walk on the ice. It can be moving me sideways. It can be, if I'm turning, I can imagine like the carousel of heaven and earth is turning. So it's much a bigger feeling. I think there's a quote from Yang Cheng Fu that says the mind should be large enough to contain the whole universe. And as much as this is physical, it's mental, and the E in the mind. So again, in the classics, they say it's the mind, not force. Use the mind, not force. Also says the mind is the king, and the body and the flesh and the bones are the court. So the king is directing the court, not the other way around. So getting back to the concept of Tai Chi and Wu Chi. So you could think Tai Chi is left and right, it's up and down, it's the 6 directions. Wu Chi is like both left and right and the space in between as one thing. Or it's up and down and the space in between as one. Or it's up and down and left and right and forward and back, like an empty sphere. So it can be helpful to, as Chen Manching broke it down, you've got the ground, you've got the heaven, you've got left and right, you've got forward and back, diagonal, you've got this stance, you've got another stance. But eventually you've got also the term one chi, so you practice as a one chi. So rather than 6 directions, you've got one thing. I think Ma Yu Liang said 4 become 1 or something like that. So all the limbs into the center is another way he describes it. But the feeling of one chi is like this: the external space, the internal space, the front, the back, the left, the right, the up, the down is just one feeling. So that's what we're looking towards, rather than confuse your brain with spinning lots of plates at once. But you might have to do that a bit just to get the feeling, especially if there's a direction that you don't feel comfortable with somehow. It might be the moon on the head is, you've not got that, so you have to work a lot on that one. And when you're practicing the form or exercises, you can choose a direction to focus on or an element if you want, but then try different ones and then try combining them and then try feeling them as one. And that gives you swimming on land as well, that just the water all around you.